The road to the cabin had long disappeared from most maps. What remained was a narrow dirt path, buried under fallen leaves, forgotten by GPS, and known only to those who had once walked it, and never spoken of it again. In the fall of 1997, a man named Eric, a freelance cameraman from Salt Lake City, inherited a property he never knew existed. It came through a distant uncle's will. No contact for over 2 decades, no explanation. Just a key, a hand-drawn map, and a post-it note that read, in faded ink, "Don't go in the dark." At first, Eric thought it was a prank, but curiosity has its own gravity. 2 weeks later, he packed his old Volvo with batteries, lanterns, a camera, and one friend who insisted on coming along, a sound engineer named Mark. They left early on a Saturday morning. The forecast warned of an early snowstorm, but they were already halfway there when the first flurries touched the windshield. When they arrived, the cabin looked like something from a forgotten horror film. Cedar walls darkened by weather and time, shutters hanging loose, the air thick with pine and something metallic. The lock turned easily. The door creaked open as if it had been waiting. Inside, there was silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that presses on your ears like you've entered a different pressure zone. Dust coated everything, but nothing seemed touched or vandalized. In the center of the living room stood a CRT television. A VCR sat beneath it, and inside the VCR, as if placed deliberately, was a black VHS tape. Its label, handwritten in shaky block letters, read only 2 words: "Watch alone." Eric laughed nervously. Mark refused to touch it, but something in the air shifted, as if the cabin was listening. As if the moment they read those words out loud, they had already pressed play. He pressed play anyway. Eric stared at the label one more time. "Watch alone." The words echoed silently in his mind, louder than they should have. Mark stood behind him with arms crossed, tension in his jaw. "Seriously, man, this feels off. Let's just grab some footage and bounce." But Eric's fingers were already brushing against the eject button. The tape slid out halfway, revealing its black plastic body and spools inside. It wasn't labeled with a brand, just a white sticker, wrinkled at the corners, the handwriting slightly smudged. He pushed it back in. The VCR whirred to life with a soft mechanical growl. The television blinked, then faded in from black. Static, then a shaky image, the interior of the same cabin, but cleaner, brighter, like it had been filmed years earlier. The camera wasn't still. It moved slowly through the living room, as if someone was holding it at chest height. Silent, no narration, no timestamp. Just the low hum of analog tape. Eric stepped back. "That's this room. Right here." Mark didn't respond. On the screen, the footage showed the living room. Same armchair, same crooked lampshade, same rug with the coffee stain near the edge. Except there was something else. A figure, just barely visible at the corner of the frame. Sitting on the floor, motionless. "Is that someone?" Eric asked, but Mark wasn't watching. He was staring at the real rug in front of him. "Dude," Mark whispered, "there's no stain." Eric followed his gaze. He was right. The rug on screen had a dark ring in the lower corner. The rug at their feet did not, but the chair was the same. The lamp was the same. The grain in the wood, even the cracks on the wall, identical. Except for one thing. In the video, the camera turned slowly toward the hallway. It paused there, long enough for them to realize it was dark, pitch black. Then a voice, low, broken, hoarse, emerged from behind the camera. "Don't go in there." The screen went black. But the VCR didn't stop. It kept spinning, as if the tape was still running. Then, from the real hallway behind them, they heard something knock. Once. Not loud, not threatening, just one single knock. Mark stepped backward. "Tell me that was you." Eric didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the television, which was now showing nothing but static. Yet the VCR kept humming. The tape was still spinning. Then came the second knock, and this one was louder. The hallway behind them stretched into darkness. Neither of them had turned on the light. Neither had wanted to. Mark turned toward the door. "I'm not staying here." But Eric didn't move. Something had changed in his posture. He wasn't frozen from fear. It was something else. Almost like he recognized the voice, or the room, or maybe even the knock. On the screen, the static gave way once more. The image returned. It was the hallway again. But this time, the figure was closer, just standing there, at the end of the corridor, head tilted slightly, not moving. Eric whispered, "It's live." And then the third knock came, not from the hallway, from inside the room. The tape didn't end. The room felt smaller. Not physically, but something in the air had changed. Denser, pressurized, like the walls were breathing with them. Or without them. The static on the TV hissed softly, filling the silence between their thoughts. The VCR continued spinning. The tape hadn't stopped, but the image had vanished. Mark took a shaky step toward the power strip. "We need to shut it off, right now." But Eric didn't move. He stared at the screen, like he was still watching something only he could see. His lips parted slightly. A whisper slipped out. "She was there again." Mark froze. "Who?" Eric blinked, snapping back. "There was a woman in the hallway. Just for a second. I saw her. Not in the video. In the reflection." He pointed to the dusty glass of the TV. Mark turned toward the hallway instinctively. It was still dark. No movement, no sound. And then the television flickered again. The image returned. But now it wasn't a recording. It was ... in real time. Eric and Mark standing in front of the screen. Except the angle was wrong. It was being filmed from inside the hallway, facing the room. Mark stumbled back. "That's not possible." Eric didn't respond. He was studying the frame. In the bottom right corner of the screen, a timestamp appeared for the first time. OCT 11/1997 to 3:12 a.m. But that single quote's S. Now, the clock on Mark's wristwatch confirmed it. The timestamp was not a relic. It was live. The tape was showing the cabin in the present, and then the figure appeared again. In the screen's upper left, emerging slowly from the hallway's shadows. It moved without sound. No footsteps, no breathing, just presence. A tall silhouette, unclear face. But what stood out wasn't its shape, it was the motion. Or the lack of it. The figure didn't walk. It seemed to slide forward, inch by inch, closer to where Mark and Eric stood, like gravity was pulling it toward them frame by frame. Mark turned to run, but stopped himself. Something wasn't right. The figure on screen was only getting closer to him. Not Eric, not the center of the room, just him. Mark looked around the real cabin. Nothing. He backed away from the screen. And the figure on the screen mirrored the movement. Step by step, in perfect sync. It wasn't a recording. It was a warning. He looked back at Eric, who was now standing completely still, eyes wide. The screen blinked again, and for 1 second, the tape showed a frame of something else entirely. A frame burned into both their minds instantly. It was the same room, but the walls were covered in VHS tapes. Hundreds, thousands, labeled, dated, some years in the future. And on the table, in the center of that vision, was a tape labeled, "Mark, do not watch." And then the image vanished. The power cut. Darkness swallowed the room. The generator shouldn't have turned on. The room plunged into silence. Real silence. Not just a lack of sound, but that heavy, suffocating quiet that feels like the world itself has paused. The television screen went black. The VCR clicked once and died. No power, no lights, just the sound of their own breathing. Mark reached for his phone. No signal, no flashlight. Dead. Eric didn't move. He was still staring where the screen had been, as if his eyes were still catching up to what they'd seen. The name on the label, the tapes, the dates. It knew my name, Mark said quietly. How could it know my name? Eric finally spoke. I think this isn't the first time we've been here. What are you talking about? Eric turned slowly, the dim outside light from a small window casting long shadows on his face. What if we already watched it? Years ago. What if this is just ... playing again? Before Mark could respond, a sound pierced the silence, the sudden mechanical cough of a generator sputtering to life. Both of them froze. No, Mark whispered. You said there was no power. There isn't, Eric said. The generator was disconnected. I saw it. There's no gas line. The tank was dry. But the sound grew louder. And then the lights overhead flickered once, humming to life. Dim, orange, like old hospital lights coming back on after a storm. The TV didn't turn on, but something else did. In the corner of the room, near the back of the cabin, a small electric heater started to buzz. Its coils glowed red. Dust burned off in curling wisps. Mark took a step back. Who turned that on? Eric didn't answer. He was staring at something behind the heater, a narrow gap in the wooden wall, a doorway they hadn't seen before. It hadn't been there when they walked in. Mark approached it slowly. It wasn't just a door. It was half open. Through the gap, they could see another room, smaller, darker, lined with shelves. Something glinted inside. A metallic reflection, like tape reels. Mark raised his voice slightly. This wasn't here. This room wasn't here. Eric stepped forward, pushing the door open with one finger. The hinges moaned softly. The smell changed instantly. Not musty like the rest of the cabin, but chemical. Cold. Inside the room were rows of VHS tapes, stacked in chaotic piles. None had commercial labels. All had been recorded by hand, and every single one had a name written in the same trembling handwriting. Mark, Eric, Janet, Samuel, Henry. Names they didn't recognize, but that felt familiar anyway. At the far end of the room, a single TV sat atop a filing cabinet, already turned on. A blue screen waited for input. Next to it, on the floor, a tape had been placed gently, as if waiting. It was unlabeled, just black, and the slot on the TV's VR was open, waiting. The black tape was already warm. Mark stood still, staring at the tape. It wasn't dusty like the others. No smudges, no fingerprints, as if it had just been placed there seconds before, as if whoever left it was still nearby. Watching, Eric knelt beside it, holding his hand just above the plastic shell. It's warm, he said. Too warm. Mark felt a tightness in his chest. Maybe from the heater? But the heater was back in the other room. This one had no power outlet, no visible heat source. The walls were cold. The air was sharp. Eric looked back toward the doorway. The main room was quiet now. But something in the cabin had shifted. The pressure had dropped, like before a storm. Or something worse. Mark whispered, "What if this is the one we're not supposed to watch?" Eric didn't answer. He was holding the tape now, turning it slowly in his hands. There was no label, no writing, but on closer inspection, the plastic wasn't smooth. There were scratches, deep, uneven, like they had been carved into it. Letters, symbols, a pattern. Mark leaned in. "It's not English." Eric nodded. "No, but I've seen it before." He opened his bag and pulled out the original map, the one that came with the key to the cabin. On the lower corner, faint and nearly faded. The same symbols had been printed in red ink. It wasn't a location. It was a warning. Mark took a step back. Then we shouldn't. But Eric was already sliding the tape into the machine. Click. The screen blinked. Blue turned to black. Then, a moment later, it wasn't footage. Not at first. It was text. Centered. White. Blinking. This is not a recording. Eric sat down. Mark stayed by the doorway, half in and half out of the room. The screen cut to a view. Not the cabin. Not any room they recognized. It was a basement, concrete walls, a flickering bulb overhead. A single chair sat in the center, facing the camera, empty, until it wasn't. There was no transition, no entrance. 1 second the chair was empty. The next, someone was sitting in it. A man, head down, shoulders trembling. His hands were tied behind the chair. Mark stepped forward, voice low. Eric ... That's you. Eric didn't speak. The man on the screen began to lift his head, slowly, with effort. And as his face came into view, battered, pale, sunken eyes, there was no doubt. It was Eric. Not older, not younger, but exactly the same. Same hoodie, same scar above the eyebrow, same look of disbelief spreading across his face. He looked straight at the camera, and then he whispered something. There was no sound, but both Eric and Mark understood it. Not because they could hear it, because they could feel it. You're already here. The basement didn't exist, yet. Mark's breath hitched. The room felt colder, tighter. He turned toward the walls around them, as if expecting them to shift, to crumble, to reveal the basement from the video as if it were hiding behind the wood. Eric stood now, his face pale. That's not possible. That wasn't filmed. That was ... live, or something close to it. But we're not in a basement, Mark said. There is no basement. They both moved through the cabin like men caught in a dream they couldn't wake up from. Eric opened the cabinet drawers. Empty. He tapped on the floorboards. Solid. No trapdoor. No stairs. But the screen kept playing. On it, the other Eric was crying now, shoulders shuddering, breathing shallow. But he never looked away from the camera. Not once. Then the camera angle changed. No jump cut. Just a slow pan, as if someone had taken the camera and moved it deliberately, circling around the bound Eric. A second figure came into frame. It was standing in the corner of the room, motionless. A woman. She was wearing a hospital gown, barefoot, her hair long tangled. Her face was hidden by shadows, but her arms hung too long at her sides, and her head tilted at an unnatural angle, like her neck had been broken and set wrong. Eric stepped closer to the screen. I've seen her before. Mark didn't respond. Because now, the walls of the real room were vibrating. Not violently, subtly, just enough to feel it in their bones, like distant thunder or the hum of something massive waking up below them. From behind the screen, they heard it, a creak. Not from the television, from underneath the floor. Mark took a step back. Eric, what did you say earlier? About this not being the first time. Eric's voice was flat. I think we've been here before. I think this place loops, resets, records. Records what? Eric looked at him. Us. The screen went black again. But this time, the message was different. White text, blinking. Access granted. Then, without a click, without a sound, the floor beneath their feet split, not like a trapdoor, but like a wound opening in the earth itself. A set of narrow wooden stairs descended into darkness. They hadn't been there before, but now they were, and they were waiting. Down there, it still looked like the cabin. The stairs shouldn't have fit under the cabin. The space wasn't big enough. From the outside, the cabin was no larger than a single floor, maybe a crawl space at best. But now, A staircase spiraled downward, carved in uneven wood, slick with moisture that hadn't come from above. Mark gripped the doorway. We're not going down there, but Eric had already started. One step, then another. The light from the room above didn't follow them. Every inch they descended seemed to swallow the glow behind them. By the third step, the staircase was already too dark, too quiet. Mark hesitated, then cursed under his breath and followed. The moment his foot hit the bottom step, something shifted. Not in the cabin, in him. Like a feeling of recognition without memory. Like he had dreamed this place once, or died here. The air was dense, metallic, cold in the lungs. They stood at the edge of a narrow hallway that shouldn't have existed. Wooden walls, but slightly warped, like they were made from memories of walls, not real ones. The floorboards creaked under their weight, but the sound didn't echo. It just died. At the end of the hallway was a room. The door was open. It was familiar. Inside, there was a rug, a coffee table, a television. It looked exactly like the main room upstairs, but not quite. The colors were off, muted, washed out like an old photo, and the layout was mirrored, like someone had tried to recreate the cabin from a bad memory. Mark stopped at the threshold. This is wrong. Eric stepped inside. It's the same, but before. Mark turned slowly. The hallway they came from was no longer behind them. The door had vanished. Just smooth wall now. Seamless. Eric, no response. Eric was standing in front of the television now. It was already on. Not plugged into anything. Not even a power cord. And playing on the screen, grainy, unstable, was footage of the cabin. Not the upstairs cabin. Not even this replica. It was them, arriving earlier that afternoon, pulling up in the car, laughing, unpacking bags. A third-person angle. Mark's heart pounded. Who filmed this? Eric turned toward him slowly. His face had changed, pale, lips trembling. It's not showing what happened, he said. It's showing what was supposed to happen. Mark shook his head. What do you mean? Eric pointed at the screen. On it, Mark was alone, sitting on the couch, watching a tape. And outside the window in the footage, Eric's car was gone. Then the camera panned, slowly, toward the hallway. And there, at the edge of the frame, the same woman stood, her head tilted, watching, waiting. Eric whispered, "We've been here before." Then, from the corner of the fake room, a VCR ejected a tape on its own. It slid out halfway, just enough to be pulled. It was labeled, "If he leaves, she stays." The tape was addressed to Mark. Mark's stomach dropped. He didn't touch the tape, but his name was written clearly, unmistakably, on the spine in that same trembling, uneven handwriting. Mark, if he leaves, she stays. It wasn't a suggestion. It felt like a verdict. Eric stepped back from the television, his eyes darting between the screen and the VCR. "This isn't about us watching anymore," he said. "It's about what we choose." Mark looked around. The replica room was too perfect. The armchair, the window, even the small scratch on the floorboard under the heater. It was all there, but muted. As if someone had built this place from memory, but the memory was decaying. "None of this makes sense," Mark said, voice shaking. "Why would someone film us? How could they have known we'd come? And why double quotes?" He hesitated, eyes narrowing at the tape. Why only my name? Eric didn't answer, because the television had begun playing another tape, automatically, without a click, without a command. It was Eric again, but different. He was older, tired, sitting in the same room, same couch, staring at the camera like he had been waiting years for it to start rolling. "I made it out," he said, "but not the way you think." Mark and Eric both leaned in. The man on the screen looked up slowly. His eyes were dull, rimmed with red. "They give you a choice," he whispered. "Not all at once, not out loud, but it's always there. Leave the tape. Or press play, go back upstairs. Or go deeper. And the deeper you go, the harder it is to remember which version of you is real." He blinked slowly, like the air around him was heavier. "There was a moment where he left," he said. "The one I was with. And when he did, I stayed. I stayed down here because I didn't move fast enough. Because I hesitated. Because ... She was already in the room. The screen flickered. The image shifted. The camera angle was now over the shoulder, and in the doorway behind the older Eric, the woman stood again. Closer now. Clearer, but her face was still ... wrong, like static that had taken human shape. Blurred, trembling, her mouth unmoving, but her expression screaming. Mark stepped back. "No, this isn't real." But then the screen cut to black, and a new line of text appeared. "One of you must leave. The other must stay." Mark looked at Eric. "This is some kind of game." Eric's voice was hollow. "Or a ritual." Then the replica door creaked open, not from wind, not from mechanics, as if someone on the other side had opened it gently, invitingly. A warm, flickering light poured through. It looked like the upstairs cabin. It looked safe. But only one figure could pass through. The rest of the room stayed cold, still, waiting. The exit wasn't meant for both. The light coming through the door didn't behave like real light. It didn't chase away shadows. It didn't warm the skin. It hovered, golden and still, as if frozen in time, a perfect imitation of comfort, designed to disarm. Mark and Eric stood side by side, staring into it. Neither spoke, because something in their bodies already knew what their minds refused to admit. Only one would leave. Eric broke the silence first. "Maybe it's a test. Maybe if we both walk through, it ends." Mark's breath was shallow. "Or maybe it starts again. For whoever stays behind." They looked at each other. The kind of look that happens when time slows down and decisions become permanent. Behind them, the television turned itself back on. The screen was divided into two panels now, split-screen footage. On the left, it showed Eric, walking through the door. Alone, Mark left behind, motionless in the replica cabin. Time sped up. Mark aged, slowly, then quickly. His hair grayed. His face hollowed. He sat by the TV, waiting. The room darkened. On the right panel, it showed Mark walking through the door. Eric stayed. The same sequence, aging, silence, alone. And both screens cut to black. No text, no sounds, just finality. Mark turned to Eric. "Do you remember coming here before?" Eric didn't blink. "No, but I remember leaving." The statement hung in the air like fog. And that's when Mark realized Eric wasn't afraid. Not like him. Because maybe Eric had already been through this. Maybe he had walked through the door in another loop, left someone else behind, and now he was back to do it again. Mark whispered, "How many times?" Eric didn't answer. But his eyes said enough. Behind them, the replica VCR ejected the black tape once more. It was different now. The label had changed. Last chance to reset. The door's light flickered. For the first time, it looked unstable. Mark stepped forward. So did Eric. Neither wanted to stay. Neither could know what would happen on the other side. But the room would not allow indecision. The floor groaned. A television hissed. And from somewhere deep in the walls, footsteps began approaching. Slow, dragging, steady. Not from the hallway, from the walls. Something was coming to make the choice for them. Unless one of them moved. Now, one step forward, one step lost. The sound of footsteps grew louder. Not fast, but deliberate, like someone walking through syrup, dragging something behind them. A boot? A chain? Or bones that had forgotten how to walk quietly? Mark's heartbeat was in his ears. Eric's eyes stayed locked on the door. The golden light flickered again, weaker now, as if the cabin itself knew it was nearing a decision. Then Eric did something Mark hadn't expected. He stepped backward, not toward the door, toward the television. Mark flinched. "What are you doing?" Eric didn't answer at first. His hand hovered over the tape. The label still read, "Last chance to reset." "I think," Eric whispered, "we've been making the wrong choice." Mark shook his head. "The only choice is to leave or stay. That's it." "No," Eric said. "That's what it wants us to think. But this tape, it keeps coming back. It changes. It updates. Maybe it's not showing us what's next. Maybe it's letting us choose something we weren't supposed to know about." Mark didn't move. The footsteps were closer now. Not behind them anymore. Beneath them. Something was crawling up from under the floor. Slow, heavy. Eric's hand trembled over the VCR. "We play it. Or we decide who walks through that door." Mark stepped toward the exit. "You really want to roll the dice on another tape?" Eric looked up, and something in his expression broke. A fracture in his resolve. He didn't want to stay. He didn't want to gamble. But he also didn't want to damn the other. Then, the television screen lit up on its own, without the tape playing. And what it showed was not past, not future. It was now. A live feed. The hallway outside the room. The thing walking toward them. It wasn't the woman anymore. It was a man, but not whole. Bent backward at the spine, arms too long, face blurred as if covered by melting film. Each step crackled with static. He was dragging a mirror behind him. A full-length, wooden-framed mirror. Its glass wasn't reflective. It was black. Eric's voice cracked. "I've seen that mirror." Mark looked over. "When?" Eric's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "In my dreams." The creature stopped just outside the room. It didn't enter. Instead, it placed the mirror against the wall and left, but the mirror stayed. On the screen, it shimmered once, and then it showed Mark and Eric in real time. But there was a third figure now, standing behind them, in the room, closer to the door, closer to the choice, and it looked like both of them. And neither. The mirror wasn't a reflection. It was a memory. Mark turned slowly, painfully, toward the back wall. But there was no mirror there. Nothing physical. Just the television and the soft hum of the VCR still holding the unplayed tape inside. But on the screen, the mirror stood tall, silent, watching. And behind it, the third figure remained motionless. Mark moved closer to the TV, trying to study the figure. Its face was unfinished, like a sketch left in charcoal. The outline of Eric's nose, the slope of Mark's brow, the posture of both, layered into one distorted shape. A composite of memory and regret. Eric's voice was low. "That's not someone else." Mark's lips barely moved. "That's us." The mirror shimmered again. Now the reflection had changed. It showed the cabin, empty. Sunlight pouring through the windows. Dust motes dancing in the stillness. No Mark, no Eric, just silence. And then, in the far corner of the mirror's surface, a shadow flickered. It moved like a reel of film unraveling. It slid across the walls, down the hallway, toward the stairs. Toward them. Eric turned toward the door. The golden light had dimmed to a dull, flickering yellow. The frame itself looked warped now, like a painting left in rain. "We're out of time," he said. "It's making the decision for us." Mark looked at the screen again. The image was no longer split. It now showed only the tape, still in the VCR, still waiting. But the label had changed once more. Now it read, "Only one of you ever existed." Mark stumbled back. "What does that mean?" Eric was silent. Mark turned toward him, and for the first time, noticed something was missing. Eric's shadow. It wasn't there. On the floor, under the sick light of the ceiling, Mark's own shadow stretched behind him, flickering with each pulse of the fake bulb. But Eric's side of the floor was bare. No shape, no depth, no proof he was real. Mark's voice shook. "You're not ... Eric looked down at his hands, turned them over slowly, then lifted his gaze. "I was the one who stayed," he said. "In the last loop, you walked out." The screen pulsed once. The mirror shimmered. Eric stepped away from the door, away from the light, toward the wall. "I remembered too much. That's why I came back. But I don't belong here anymore." Mark was frozen. Eric placed one hand on the wooden frame of the television. His body began to blur. Not vanish. Blur. Like a VHS being paused and fast-forwarded at the same time. His last words were barely audible. "Close the loop." Then he was gone. Not vanished. Just no longer there. As if he'd never been. Mark turned to the VCR. The tape was still waiting. The tape played without a sound. Mark didn't touch the VCR. He didn't press play. He didn't move at all. But the tape began to play anyway. The television flickered, struggling to stabilize the image. Horizontal lines pulsed across the screen like a heartbeat. The frame snapped into focus. A hospital corridor, abandoned, yellowed with time. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, some blinking, others completely dark. The silence was unbearable. The camera moved forward as if gliding, following an invisible path. Door after door passed by. Some were slightly open, revealing only shadows. Others were locked shut with rusted chains looped through cracked handles. Then the camera stopped. It faced one particular door, unmarked. Slowly, painfully, it began to open. The footage cut. Now the screen showed a room full of mirrors. Not just one, but dozens. Different shapes, sizes, styles. Each standing upright like a person. Each facing the center of the room where a single wooden chair waited. And on that chair, Mark was sitting. But not as he was now. This version of him looked empty. Like someone who had forgotten how to be human. His eyes were open but unfocused. His chest rose and fell, but only barely. He didn't blink. He didn't move. The mirrors reflected him from every angle. But in each reflection, something was different. One version of him had no mouth. Another had blacked out eyes. Another was smiling faintly, too faintly. Another was whispering something over and over, but no sound came through. Mark stepped toward the screen involuntarily. His breath fogged the cold air. He didn't know what this place was, but somehow, in the back of his mind, he remembered it. Not as a place he'd been, but as a place he'd tried desperately to forget. The camera on screen panned to a single mirror in the corner of the room. Its reflection showed no Mark, only the chair, empty. Suddenly, the screen flickered again, hard. And now, it was showing real-time footage. The room Mark stood in now. The fake replica of the cabin. But the camera angle was wrong. It was coming from the ceiling, looking down on him. A surveillance view. He looked up. Nothing. No lens. No opening. Just wood. But the feed was still broadcasting him, exactly as he stood. And then, in the lower right corner of the screen, a timestamp appeared. NOV 7, 2025 to 3:03 a.m. Mark checked his watch. It was the exact time. And beneath the timestamp, new text blinked into view, slowly typing itself out in white block letters. Final entry begins now. Please remain seated. The chair from the mirror room creaked behind him. It hadn't been there a second ago. But now it was. Same wood, same shape, waiting for him. Sitting down was the first mistake. The chair hadn't made a sound when it appeared. It didn't scrape the floor, didn't shift the air. It was just suddenly there, as if it had always been, and Mark had only now remembered to notice it. He stared at it, breath caught in his throat. His knees trembled. On the screen, the words remained frozen. Please remain seated. But there was no indication for how long, or why. Mark backed away from the chair, step by step, until his back brushed against the far wall. The room, though dim, seemed to narrow with each breath he took. The shadows grew taller, their shapes unfamiliar. They were no longer echoes of furniture or structure. They were watching shapes. He looked again at the television. The live feed now zoomed in slowly, a deliberate push-in on the center of the replica room. The chair was framed perfectly, empty, waiting, but as the image stabilized, the screen glitched. A single frame appeared for less than a second. Mark saw it, clearly. He was already sitting. He wasn't in real life, but the tape showed him seated, still, head bowed slightly forward, hands folded in his lap. It was an image of defeat, of surrender, of compliance. He turned around. The chair was still empty, but it no longer felt that way. Something about it had changed. It hummed now, not with sound, but with pressure. Like the air around it had density, weight, gravity, and that gravity was pulling at him. Mark whispered, "No," but the room didn't hear him. Or maybe it didn't care. Behind him, the television crackled. Static rose. Then another frame emerged. It was Eric, not older, not distorted, just ... gone. His image sat in the same chair. His eyes were vacant, his mouth slightly open, as if mid-sentence. He didn't move, didn't breathe. He looked like a wax figure left in a cold room too long. The tape skipped again. Now it showed Mark, seated once more. But this time, his face was gone. A smooth, featureless mask where his identity should have been. The room around him now filled with people. Not people, figures. Dozens of them, all seated, all still, all faceless. And every single one was watching one chair. His. Mark screamed, but no sound left his mouth. The screen blinked again. Recording in progress. And then from behind him, the chair scraped forward on its own. Just once, inviting him or daring him. The VCR ejected the tape one final time, but there was no label anymore. Only a single symbol scratched into its surface. A circle, with a line through it. And beneath the screen, burned into the wooden panel like it had always been there, were 5 words. "You have been here before." The record never stops. Mark staggered back from the chair, but the floor felt slick beneath him, like gravity had subtly shifted. The room no longer obeyed its original geometry. Corners bent. Shadows leaned inward. The walls seemed closer than before, yet the ceiling stretched impossibly high above him. The TV screen blinked once more. A final line of text appeared. "Begin archiving." Then the tape pulled itself back into the VCR. No button pressed. No human command. Just the machinery obeying whatever force governed this place. The camera on screen began recording again. This time, it wasn't footage of the cabin. It wasn't showing the past. It wasn't showing what might be. It was streaming Mark's thoughts. Somehow, his own memories were unraveling onto the screen. The inside of his childhood home, his first car crash, the face of someone he once loved but hadn't thought of in years. The screen cycled through images at an impossible speed, his life out of order, like a dream trying to reconstruct itself. He screamed. This time, the sound came out, but it wasn't from his throat. It came from the television. His voice, distorted, echoed from the speakers a full 2 seconds after he spoke. Not just replaying, mimicking, delayed. He turned toward the chair. It was burning now, not with fire, with light. A cold, colorless glow, like the flicker of old fluorescent bulbs. Shapes moved within it, not flames, not shadows, shapes. Figures trying to emerge or trying to pull him in. And then he heard the click behind him. A second VCR had slid out of the wall. He hadn't seen it before. It was hidden in the boards, flush with the room itself. Inside it, another tape. This one labeled clearly, Mark Archival Copy Number 19. He stared at it, heart pounding. Number P. That meant there had been 18 before. 18 recordings. 18 attempts. 18 failures. He stepped toward it slowly. His hand hovered above the eject button. He couldn't bring himself to press it. Not again. Because deep inside, something in him cracked, and he remembered something that hadn't belonged to this version of him. He remembered pressing play before. He remembered running. He remembered screaming someone else's name. But most of all, he remembered watching himself sit in that chair, over and over, and each time the image grew blurrier, less human, less whole, until finally there was no one left to watch it at all. Only the tape, still spinning, still recording, forever. Archive number 20 was already in progress. Mark didn't press play. He didn't have to. Because as he stood there, frozen, breathless, unmoored from any sense of time or body, a second VCR activated by itself. The tape labeled Mark Archival Copy Number 19 slid deeper into the slot with a soft mechanical click, and the machine began to hum, but the TV didn't show it. Instead, the screen remained black, silent, not because nothing was happening, but because something new was happening. Mark's ears began to ring, not with noise, but absence. A pressure against his hearing, like the sound had been vacuumed out of the room, and then the mirror returned. Not a physical object, not hanging on the wall, but projected onto the television screen, replacing the black void with a now familiar image. Mark, sitting. Again. Still, but not like before. This version of Mark was fading, frame by frame, limb by limb, like a VHS degrading from overuse. First, his hands turned to static, then his torso, then his face, and finally, only the outline of the chair remained, until that too glitched out of existence. The screen stayed on, but it no longer showed anything recognizable. Just a cursor, blinking, waiting for input. Then text began typing itself. Archive number 19 corrupted. Initializing new record. Subject, Mark 20. Mark's knees buckled. He dropped to the floor. No, he whispered. No, I didn't sit. I didn't play it. I didn't? But his voice didn't echo anymore. Because the room was no longer listening. It was recording. The air around him shimmered faintly. The chair was now directly behind him again, without having moved. The television screen now showed a third-person view of him, from just behind his shoulder, exactly the kind of angle a camcorder would capture if someone were filming him from the dark. Mark turned around slowly. There was no camera, but the image remained, live, tracking his every breath. The cursor on screen blinked again. New lines appeared. Do not resist. Do not speak. The copy must be clean. Mark clutched his head. He felt the weight inside his skull, not like a headache, but like his thoughts were being peeled away, layer by layer, as if he was being reduced to data, a digital soul. Then the television screen split in two. On the left, a timer counting up. 0 hours, 0 minutes and 1 second. 0 hours, 0 minutes and 2 seconds. 0 hours, 0 minutes and 3 seconds. On the right, the label for the new tape appeared. Mark Archival Copy Number 20, he screamed. But the moment the sound left his mouth, the right half of the screen flickered and updated. Error. Distortion detected in subject. Beneath it, initiating correction protocol. And then the light changed. Not from the door, not from the screen. From under the floor. A dull red glow, rising, alive. The tape kept rolling. This wasn't the first archive, and wouldn't be the last. The red glow beneath the floorboards pulsed like a heartbeat now. It wasn't light. It was memory. Or what was left of one. Mark couldn't move, not because something held him physically, but because something inside him had already accepted the ending. The screen displayed no more instructions, just the timer. 0 hours 4 minutes and 12 seconds. 0 hours 4 minutes and 13 seconds. 0 hours 4 minutes and 14 seconds. The count-up never stopped. Neither did the hum of the VCR. The tape continued rolling, but he hadn't sat down. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't obeyed. Still, it didn't matter, because the recording didn't require compliance, only presence. He was here. That was enough. And deep down, he understood it now. This wasn't punishment. It was preservation. Every person who entered this place became part of it, not out of malice, not even out of design. The cabin didn't want to hurt them. It wanted to remember them, perfectly, precisely, over and over again, so that one day, someone else might press play and meet the fragments of those who came before. The mirror flashed again, but this time, Mark saw dozens of reflections, hundreds, rows of chairs stretching into blackness, each one occupied by someone almost like him, some older, some missing pieces, some only shadows with eyes, but all of them watching, waiting, not trapped, just ... looping. Mark took one step back toward the VCR. He removed the tape with trembling fingers. It was still warm. No label this time, just smooth plastic. He turned it over. On the underside, scratched by something sharp, a message had been etched. If you found this, you never left. The cabin groaned around him. The door with the golden light was gone now. So was the chair. So was the upstairs. Only the room remained. The replica, the screens, the machine, and the new tape he now held in his hand. There was nowhere left to go. And so he sat. Not by force, not by fear, by design, by memory. He placed the unlabeled tape into the VCR and pressed record. The screen blinked one final time. Text faded in, letter by letter. Archival copy number 20 complete. Ready for next viewer. Then the cabin exhaled and the timer reset. 0 hours 0 minutes and 0 seconds. Outside, in the real Utah wilderness, the snow began to fall again. Somewhere far away, a letter was being mailed. A deed, a map, a key. No name on the envelope. Only a note. Don't go in the dark.